Catherine, I've got great news. I just sold that old cabin of yours up in the mountains. Got a decent price for it, too. 60,000. Not bad for a place that's been sitting empty most of the year, wouldn't you say? The smug satisfaction in Richard's voice crackled through my phone speaker, hitting me like a physical blow. My fingers tightened around my cell phone as I stood frozen in my kitchen, coffee mug suspended halfway to my lips. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as his words registered. The cabin, my sanctuary, my inheritance from Mom, sold. My name is Catherine Ellis, and my stepfather had just casually informed me he'd sold property that wasn't his to sell. Property that had been my escape, my peace, my connection to the mother I'd lost 3 years ago. You did what? My voice emerged as a whisper, though inside my head I was screaming. Sold the cabin. You know, that place you barely use? Never understood why your mother left it to you anyway. It's been a financial drain for years. I set my coffee down before I could drop it, my hand trembling with sudden white-hot rage. Richard, you had absolutely no right to sell that cabin. None. It's not your property. He chuckled, the sound grating against my ear. Come on, Kathy. Don't be dramatic. We're family. What's yours is ours, and we needed the money. We? There is no we here, Richard. That cabin belonged to my mother, and she left it to me. Not you. Me. My voice had risen an octave, echoing off the kitchen tiles. You can't just sell someone else's property. Well, it's done now, he replied dismissively. The papers are signed, and the money's been deposited. Most of it went to cover some debts I had to settle. Debts? What debts? Though I already knew the answer. Richard's gambling had been a source of constant tension between him and my mother. Even after her death, he hadn't stopped. Just some investments that didn't pan out the way I expected, he said evasively. Look, what's done is done. I did what I had to do. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. When I spoke again, my voice was deadly calm. Here's something you don't know, Richard. That cabin isn't just mine. Mom left it to me and Laura jointly. We co-own it, which means you couldn't sell it even if my name was the only one on the deed, which it isn't. You needed Laura's signature, too. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Richard clearly hadn't known about this detail. You're making that up, he finally said, but the confidence had drained from his voice. Call the county records office if you don't believe me. The property is registered to Catherine Ellis and Laura Winters. Has been since Mom died. There's no way you could have legally sold it without both our signatures. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to find a way out of the hole he'd dug. I need to go, he muttered, and the line went dead. I immediately called Laura, my hands still shaking. Laura had been my best friend since college, and when Mom had left us the cabin, it had cemented our bond even further. We'd spent countless weekends there, hiking the trails, sitting by the fire, healing from our respective heartbreaks and celebrating our victories. Laura, Richard sold the cabin. I blurted out the moment she answered. He what? Her voice rose in disbelief. He can't do that. That's what I told him, but he says the papers are signed and the money's already been spent on his gambling debts. Hold on, Laura said, and I could hear her typing rapidly. Laura worked in real estate law, which at this moment felt like divine intervention. I'm checking the county records online. Catherine, there's no record of a sale. The cabin is still registered to both of us. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by determination. So whatever he did wasn't legal. Not even close, Laura confirmed. If someone gave him money for the cabin, they've been scammed, but the property hasn't changed hands officially. I'm going to confront him, I said, grabbing my car keys. This has gone too far. Want me to come with you? Laura offered. No, I need to handle this myself, but I might need your legal expertise afterward. I'm here. And Catherine, don't let him manipulate you. Remember, you have the law on your side. Those words echoed in my mind as I drove to the house where I grew up, the house where my mother had lived with Richard until her death. I'd avoided visiting for months, finding excuses to meet Richard elsewhere on the rare occasions when family obligation demanded it. Now I parked in the driveway, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. Richard opened the door before I could knock, his expression a mixture of defiance and wariness. He'd aged in the 3 years since Mom died, his hair grayer, his face more lined, but I felt no sympathy as I brushed past him into the living room. "You need to undo whatever illegal transaction you've made," I said without preamble. "The cabin wasn't yours to sell." Richard sighed dramatically, lowering himself into his favorite armchair. "Catherine, be reasonable. The cabin was just sitting there, barely used. The money has helped clear some important debts." "Your gambling debts aren't my problem," I countered. "And the cabin isn't just sitting there. Laura and I use it regularly. It's our property, not yours." "Your mother would have wanted to help me," he tried, playing the card he always used when backed into a corner. "Don't you dare use Mom to justify this," I snapped, anger flaring hot and bright. "She left the cabin to Laura and me specifically because she knew you'd try something like this. And guess what? She was right." Richard's face hardened. "The sale is already done. The buyers have paid. Then you'd better get their money back, because the sale isn't valid. Laura checked the county records. There's been no transfer of ownership, and there can't be without both our signatures." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine worry in his eyes. "They won't be happy about this." "Neither am I," I retorted. "Who did you sell it to? And how did you manage to convince them without proper documentation?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "It was a private sale, cash deal. The buyer wanted to avoid certain formalities. So you not only attempted to sell property that wasn't yours, but you engaged in a potentially illegal transaction to do it?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you realize how much trouble you could be in?" "I was desperate, Catherine," he said, his voice suddenly small. "The debts. They were getting out of hand. There were people threatening me." Despite everything, a small part of me ached at the pathetic figure he cut. This was the man who had been in my life since I was 12, who had made my mother happy for many years before his gambling took over. But those days were long gone. "Your problems don't justify stealing from me," I said firmly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to contact whoever gave you that money and tell them the truth. You're going to arrange to return their money, and you're going to sign a document stating that you have no claim to the cabin and no right to act on my behalf in any capacity." "I don't have the money anymore," he admitted, avoiding my gaze. "It's gone." Of course it was. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Then you need to figure out how to get it back. Because if you don't fix this, Laura and I will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you and whoever thought they were buying our property." I left Richard sitting there, head in his hands, and drove straight to Laura's apartment. The confrontation had left me drained but resolved. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Laura was waiting for me, her laptop open on her dining table. "How did it go?" she asked as I collapsed into a chair across from her. "About as well as expected," I sighed. "He admitted to selling the cabin in a private cash deal to pay off gambling debts, and the money's already gone." Laura's expression hardened. "That's fraud, Catherine, plain and simple." "I know," I said, rubbing my temples. "But what do we do now? The buyer thinks they own our cabin, and Richard has no way to return their money." "First things first," Laura said, shifting into professional mode. "We need to find out who this buyer is and what documentation they have. Then we need to formally notify them that the sale was fraudulent and that we are the legal owners." She turned her laptop toward me, showing a draft of a letter. "I've already started working on a cease and desist, but we'll need the buyer's information to proceed." "Richard won't just hand that over," I pointed out. "Then we'll have to find out another way," Laura said determinedly. "Let's start with the real estate agent. If there was one involved, they might be more willing to cooperate once they understand they were part of a fraudulent transaction." It took some digging and several phone calls, but we finally located the real estate agent who had facilitated the sale. Melissa Owen sounded horrified when Laura explained the situation. "I had no idea," she insisted. "Mr. Peterson presented himself as having full authority to sell the property. He showed me documents that appeared to be in order." "Forged documents," I said grimly. "I can see that now," Melissa admitted. "This could be very damaging to my reputation. What do you need from me?" "Everything," Laura said firmly. "The buyer's information, copies of all documentation Richard provided, and a written statement confirming that you now understand the sale was conducted without proper authority. Melissa agreed readily, perhaps seeing cooperation as her best path forward. Within hours, we had what we needed. The buyer was a developer named James Whitman, who had been planning to demolish the cabin and build a modern vacation home in its place. Construction is scheduled to start next week, Melissa told us. Mr. Whitman was very eager to move quickly. Armed with this information, Laura finalized the cease and desist letter, outlining in clear legal terms that the sale had been fraudulent, that Richard Peterson had no authority to sell the property, and that any attempts to proceed with construction or to claim ownership would result in immediate legal action. Should we deliver this in person? I asked, looking at the finished document. Laura nodded. It'll have more impact, and I want to see his face when he realizes what he's gotten himself into. The following morning, we drove to the address Melissa had provided for James Whitman, a sleek office building downtown. His assistant tried to turn us away, claiming Mr. Whitman was in meetings all day. But Laura's firm insistence that this was a time-sensitive legal matter involving fraudulent property transactions quickly got us ushered into his office. James Whitman was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the polished appearance of someone used to getting his way. His smile vanished as Laura introduced us and explained why we were there. "This is absurd," he said, scanning the cease and desist letter we'd placed on his desk. "I have a signed contract and a deed transfer." "A fraudulent transfer," Laura corrected. "If you check with the county records office, you'll find that the property is legally owned by Catherine Ellis and myself. Richard Peterson had no right to sell it to you." Whitman's face darkened. "I paid $60,000 in cash for that property." "Then you should take that up with Richard Peterson," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But the cabin belongs to us, and we have no intention of selling it." "This isn't over," Whitman warned, reaching for his phone. "My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers will tell you exactly what I'm telling you," Laura interrupted, "that you've been defrauded by Richard Peterson, and that any claim you think you have to our property is invalid. They'll also advise you that pursuing this further would be throwing good money after bad." I could see Whitman wavering, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Peterson assured me everything was above board," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "He lied," I said simply. "And now you have a choice. You can pursue legal action against him to recover your money, which we would fully support, or you can fight us for a property that legally belongs to us, which would be costly and ultimately futile." Whitman stared at us for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes. Finally, he nodded curtly. "I'll have my team look into this. If what you're saying checks out, Peterson will regret the day he crossed me." "Just so we're clear," Laura added, "any attempts to access the property or to proceed with construction will be met with immediate legal action. We've already notified the county sheriff and the building permit office of the situation." We left Whitman's office feeling victorious, but knowing the battle wasn't over yet. Richard would face the consequences of his actions, whether from us or from Whitman and his lawyers. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. The man had been my stepfather for over 15 years, and my mother had loved him once, but he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "I just got a very angry call from James Whitman," he said, his voice strained. "What have you done, Catherine?" "What needed to be done," I replied calmly. "You sold property that wasn't yours. Did you really think Laura and I would just let that go?" "He's threatening to sue me." Richard's voice cracked with panic. "I can't afford a lawsuit. I don't have the money to pay him back." "That's not my problem," I said, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You created this mess, Richard." "Please, Catherine," he begged. "Help me figure a way out of this. Your mother would have—" "Don't," I cut him off sharply. "Don't you dare use Mom to manipulate me again. She would be ashamed of what you've done." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was defeated. "I never meant for things to get this bad. After your mother died, I couldn't stop. The gambling was the only thing that made me feel anything. Despite my resolve to stay strong, I felt my anger softening slightly. Not enough to bail him out, but enough to offer a small olive branch. Get help, Richard. Real help this time. Not for me, not for Mom's memory, but for yourself. And Whitman? He asked quietly. You'll need to face the consequences of your actions, I said firmly. But if you're serious about getting help, Laura and I won't pursue additional legal action against you. 2 days later, Laura and I drove up to the cabin, needing to see for ourselves that it was still standing, still ours. The familiar winding road through the mountains brought back a flood of memories. Weekend getaways with Mom, late-night conversations with Laura by the fireplace, peaceful mornings watching the mist rise over the pines. As we pulled up to the small clearing where the cabin stood, relief washed over me. It was untouched, just as we'd left it during our last visit. The weathered logs, the stone chimney, the porch swing Mom had installed the summer before she got sick. All still there, waiting for us. Laura squeezed my hand as we walked up the steps and unlocked the door. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. Mom's old quilt still draped over the couch. The bookshelf still held our eclectic collection of novels and field guides, and the kitchen cupboards still housed the mismatched mugs we'd collected over the years. We did it, Laura said softly, looking around the main room. We protected what's ours. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. This place was more than wood and stone. It was memories and peace and connection. To my mother, to Laura, to myself. Richard had tried to take that away, treating it as nothing more than a commodity to be sold off to cover his debts. But he had failed. Later, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard. Checking into a treatment program tomorrow. Whitman has agreed to monthly payments. I'm sorry, Catherine, for everything. I showed the message to Laura, who raised an eyebrow skeptically. Do you believe him? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. But it's his problem now, not ours. I silenced my phone and set it aside, turning my attention back to the mountains, to the moment, to the sanctuary we had fought for and won. Whatever happened with Richard, whatever challenges lay ahead, this place would remain our constant, our inheritance, our home away from home. The cabin stood solid and unchanged as the last light faded from the sky, a testament to what can be protected when you stand your ground. And in that moment, I could almost feel my mother's presence, her approval, her peace becoming my own.